Welcome back to our course on Project 2013. In the previous section we started looking at levelling, covered some of the basics of how to level all or part of a project, and we got to the levelling options regarding how to resolve over allocations. And in this section we're going to concentrate on the last batch of those options, and we're going to start by looking at levelling order, which is a very important option to understand. Now, in the resource levelling dialog, in the levelling order control, there are three options: ID only, standard, and priority comma standard, which means priority followed by standard. By default that is set at standard, and standard is the setting that was used when I levelled this project before. Now, in standard, what Project 2013 does is to look at a number of factors, including dependencies, dates and priorities, in order to determine which tasks to delay in order to resolve resource over allocations. If you look at what actually happened here, let me just move that dialog out of the way. We had four tasks to begin with: ground floor doors, upper floor doors, ground floor windows and upper floor windows. They were all starting on the same date. It delayed three of them, and the one that it delayed the most was upper floor doors. It delayed ground floor windows by 7 elapsed days and upper floor windows by 12 elapsed days. Elapsed days will include weekends. Now, why it did that, it's a function of the calculation that it does. But let's look at the impact of these other options on how they would have approached the levelling here. Let's first of all look at ID only. In the case of ID only, the way that resource levelling works is to base it purely on the IDs of the tasks. The higher the ID, the more likely a task is to be delayed. So the tasks near the beginning of the project will tend to be the ones that keep their timescales, and the ones later on will be the ones that tend to be delayed. Now, you may remember me mentioning right near the beginning of the course that in effect the sequence of the tasks in terms of how they appear in the project schedule isn't really important, but this is one of those aspects where it is, in that by implication here the tasks that have higher ID numbers, the ones that are lower down if you like in your chart, are the ones that are generally going to be later, and therefore the ones that generally you're going to be more likely to be prepared to delay when you have resource over allocation issues. So that is one situation in which there is some significance in the position of a task within the list of project tasks, and it also is another reason to, generally speaking, have the earlier tasks near the beginning of the project. So what I'm going to do now is to make sure that I've got that ID only selected, and I'm going to clear the existing levelling for the entire project. And now when I level the entire project, I should see the ID only option take effect. So click on level all, and what happens this time is that the delay that's added, the levelling delay that's added to the tasks which were over allocated, is strictly in order of IDs. So the task with ID 10 is not delayed at all. 11 is delayed by 7 elapsed days, 13 by 9 elapsed days, 14 by 14 elapsed days. And now my over allocations have gone, and I've used the option of ID based levelling. Now let's look at incorporating priority into levelling. So what I'm going to do here is to clear the existing levelling for the entire project. Then I'm going to choose one of the tasks. What about ground floor windows? Double click to open up the task information, and I'm going to give that task a priority of 520, so a slightly higher priority than all of the other tasks within my project. Click on OK. Now go into levelling options, and in the levelling order I'm going to select the third option, which is priority comma standard. Click on OK, and now let me do a level all. And what you'll now find is that the task with the higher priority, which is ground floor windows, task 13, is now the one that doesn't get delayed. The other three tasks all have the same priority as each other, so the order in which they are leveled is the standard order, which in this case means that ground floor doors happens first, then upper floor windows, and then upper floor doors. So that's the three options for leveling order. Now let's look at the other options within the resolving over-allocation section of the resource leveling dialog. First of all, we have level only within available slack. Now we haven't talked about slack yet. We're going to talk about that in a subsequent section when we talk about the critical path. But basically, if you have this checked, level only within available slack, Project 2013 is constrained to leveling in such a way that you don't delay the overall project. Some of the tasks which are over-allocated or which share over-allocated resource, it may be possible to delay without delaying the overall project. And basically, if you have this option checked, they're the only ones that Project 2013 is going to add a leveling delay to. So it will only level tasks where you don't affect the end date. Now at the moment I don't have that checked, so that means that leveling in the case of the project I'm working on here could involve delaying the overall project. We'll talk about slack later on, and then I think this option will mean a lot more to you. Now, to fully understand the next option, you're going to need to know a little bit more about how work is distributed in a task. I'm going to come back to that later on. But basically, what this option here, leveling can adjust individual assignments on a task, what that means is that leveling is allowed to adjust one resource's work schedule on a task independently of other resources that are working on the same task. Now in some situations that may be reasonable, and in others it may not. And the next one also may be reasonable in some circumstances and not others. Leveling can create splits in remaining work. Let's suppose that you're partway through a task, you've done say half of a task, and you have a resource over allocation issue. Generally speaking, because the task is started, then Project 2013 won't be able to reschedule the start date of the task because it's already started. But if you allow Project 2013 to split a task, what it can do is to split it into two. The work that's completed is completed, so it's in the past, and the work that remains to be done effectively forms a new task that can be leveled, so it can have a leveling delay added to it, and that work can be moved off into the future. Now, given the type of work that you do, the type of projects you manage, and the type of task, it may or may not be reasonable for you to allow that when you're working on your projects. Now, the last two options here I'm going to deal with quite quickly. One of them, level resources with the proposed booking type. There are booking types, and one of them is proposed. This is where you've got a request to use a resource, but you haven't actually got a committed resource assignment yet. We're not going to be talking about proposed booking types on this course, but if you do use proposed booking types, then you can see here whether those proposed bookings should be included in the resource leveling calculations. Bear in mind that with a proposed booking you may not yet have confirmed it, you may not know whether you're actually going to have that task or indeed the relevant resource working on that task. The last option, level manually scheduled tasks. We've talked about manually scheduled tasks. If you want to include manually scheduled tasks within resource leveling, then make sure this checkbox is checked and the resources used on manually scheduled tasks will be rolled into the leveling process with the ones that are in the auto scheduled tasks as well. So that's pretty much it on the resource leveling dialog. And there's just one other thing I want to show you in relation to leveling. Let me just clear this leveling again one more time. Clear it for the whole project. Go back and select the first task again. One of the things that you can do is to step through the leveling requirements for a project using the Next Over Allocation button in the Level group on the Resource tab. So if I click on Next Over Allocation, it takes me to the Next Over Allocation. Of course, in this project, which is quite a small, simple project, we only have 4 and they're all for the same resource. But if you just want to step from over-allocation to over-allocation, look at each particular situation and maybe resolve it manually, or at least consider whether it's appropriate to resolve it in an automatic way. And next over-allocation can help you with that. And then also, if you want to take a look at over-allocations and what the shape of them is, don't forget, if we go back to View, we can go to the Resource Usage View or Resource Graph. Let's go to Resource Usage. In tabular form, you can identify where the resource over-allocations are. If you look at the list of resources here, you can see that Carpenter has a nice yellow warning sign there. This resource is over allocated. List of the tasks that resource is working on, and then if I step through, I can find red wherever there is a resource over allocation. So in this case, in that particular week, we have 88 hours work scheduled for the Carpenter against a background working week of 40 hours. And of course, let's just have one quick look then at the resource graph. Apply the resource graph. Let's find Carpenter. We can see over allocated in red there. And again, if we step through, it's easy to see where the over allocation occurs. So that's it on resource leveling for now, and that's it in this section. I'll see you in the next one.